We live in a new world now after September 11, 2001, but it's true. None of us who lived through that will ever forget it. Thomas Friedman, who writes for the New York Times, was on assignment in Tel Aviv when the World Trade Center towers came down, and he thought, what kind of world are my two little girls going to grow up in? Regrettably, my girls and yours, he wrote, will not grow up in the same world we grew up in. History just took a right turn into a blind alley, and something very dear has been taken from us. And so you are graduating from high school into a world that is very different from any world any of us have ever known. And what I wish for you, my prayer for you, in addition to your health and happiness and peace, is that somehow you will respond to this new world with courage. The truth is, if you haven't discovered it yet, you will. The truth is that life sometimes knocks the courage out of us, the will, the intent, the hopefulness, and we start to live narrow, suspicious lives lived out of our fear. Samuel Friedman, who's dean of the journalism school at Columbia, said that what he feels from university students these days is a kind of frightened resignation and a wish that it would all go away, a sense that something awful is about to happen, and a wish that the terrorists and suicide bombings and wars in Afghanistan and Iraq would simply go away. And you know, when we start to think like that and live out of fear of what might happen, our lives become smaller. We become smaller. That's what fear can do. Fear of the future, fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of death. Fear causes us to give up and give in and lower our sights, our expectations, our hopes, and choose a much reduced life. Isn't that exactly what happens every time you and I decline to try something adventuresome and demanding and exciting because we're afraid that we might fail or that we'll be inconvenienced? Isn't that exactly what happens when you and I look out at a world full of a multitude of horrendous problems and wring our hands and try desperately to wish it all away? There's a lot of fear in the air these days. During the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt, the president, went on the radio and reassured a frightened nation by saying the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Well, September 11, friends, was designed for fear. It was designed to make us frightened and cautioned as a people. We know personally how fear limits and paralyzes, how fear of failing keeps us from trying something new. Children humiliated by a teacher are afraid to speak up and ask another question, sometime for the rest of their lives. Fear of rejection keeps us from going out for the team or trying out for a part in the play or applying for the job or a promotion. Fear of seeming foolish keeps us from saying, I love you. Someone said that if Michelangelo had been afraid of heights, we'd have the Sistine Chapel floor instead of that glorious ceiling. There's something paralyzing about fear, something that reduces the scope of our lives and the extent of our love, the depth of our passion, and the generosity of our giving. There are a lot of shaking hands and trembling knees out there. A lot of fear every time the Department of Homeland Security raises an alert and tells us that something terrible might happen to someone somewhere. What exactly are we supposed to do with that information? Not get out of bed in the morning? Not go to work? Not gather like this in football stadiums? It will, I propose, be important not to give the terrorists the victory of terrifying us, diminishing us, limiting us, restricting us, convincing us to live in our fear, not in love and compassion and courage. And that, I believe, is the particular challenge this evening before all of us, but particularly you, the graduates of the class of 2003. A friend of mine, Peter Gomes, minister at Harvard's Memorial Church, knows a lot about your generation. And Gomes says you are, in fact, impatient with the culture we are handing to you. You seem to know, he says, better than most of us, that the culture of consumption and acquisition, indulge yourself, pamper yourself, take care of yourself, this buds for you culture has not delivered on the promise to make you happy and make us happy. Young people, Gomes says, don't want their father's Oldsmobile. They want and deserve something better. They want a good life, true happiness, and a chance to do something worth doing. They want to offer themselves to something worth their sacrifice, to leave the world a little better place because they've been here. And in a very real sense, that begins tonight, as you leave this wonderfully secure first chapter of your lives and begin the second chapter now as adults, on your own mostly, more or less in charge. The decision to live courageously or timidly with caution is one you and I make every day of our lives. It comes all wrapped up in other choices: to love or not to love, to get involved or to hold back, to serve and help, to give your life to something important or to retreat and settle for a good credit rating and money in the bank, to commit yourself passionately to some improbable dream like the peace of the world or the reconciliation of all of God's people or the healing and housing and feeding of all the children, or staying at arm's length, refusing to invest, risk, afraid, a spectator instead of a participant. A little story to close. Just 200 years ago, almost to the day, a great American adventure was launched. On July 5, 1803, Meriwether Lewis left Washington for Pittsburgh to pick up a large keelboat to float down the Ohio River to St. Louis and then head west with Captain William Clark to explore the vast American continent. All over the country this year, we are celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Lewis and Clark expedition. What a feat that was. President Thomas Jefferson commissioned a skeptical Congress to appropriate $2,500 for the expedition. There was a 100% cost overrun before the party even left Washington, and the final bill was many times that, which is somehow comforting. Some things never change. In any event, Lewis and Clark and their small troop set off into a vast wilderness no European, Caucasian, or African American, for that matter, had ever seen. Their job was to see if there was a water passage to the Pacific, but along the way to look at everything and tell President Jefferson what they saw. Jefferson thought they might encounter woolly mammoths and mastodons out west. What they did see were huge grizzly bears, which scared them to death, and Native Americans who didn't know what to make of them. My favorite part of that whole story, and the reason I'm telling you this, happens on the night of April 7th, 1805. Lewis was writing in his journal in his buffalo skin teepee in what is now North Dakota, where the Knife River intersects with the Missouri. That was the day of no return, April 7th, the day when Lewis and Clark had to decide whether or not they would go forward into the wilderness or turn back and wait for someone years hence to invent the internal combustion engine and an SUV to further the party. It was that day that they had to decide to send the big keelboat back down the river. That boat had carried all their supplies, and it provided shelter and protect from attack. But the boat could go no further. What a great moment. Lewis wrote in his journal that without the big boat, all they had were 6 small canoes and 2 rowboats for a journey of more than 2,000 miles. And then, writing by flickering candlelight in a teepee on the edge of the unknown, Lewis became reflective that night. The picture which now presented itself to me was a most pleasing one, he wrote. Entertaining as I do the most confident hope of succeeding in this darling project, I could but esteem this moment of my departure as among the most happy of my life. Well, I think Lewis should have been scared to death. He should have been in a dry bunk on that keelboat heading back down the river to safety. I don't know about you, but when that keelboat disappeared, I think happy would not describe my feelings. Maybe fear, terror, surely anxiety, but not happy. But that is what Lewis wrote as he stepped into the unknown, facing a dangerous, demanding future. That's what courage is. Not never being afraid, but proceeding in spite of your fear and walking into an unknown future. And not to be melodramatic, but that's what this occasion is really about. And each of you is in some way in that place. A lot of the security systems that brought you this far floating now out of sight, and you standing here on the edge of the unknown. And may I have the great privilege, in the midst of all the advice and good wishes that will be offered to you tonight, to add this: don't be afraid. Or better said, please don't live out of your fear. Have the courage to care passionately, to love deeply, to give yourself to something important enough to live for, or if necessary, to die for. It's a choice we make every day. Be of good courage, and God bless you on your way. Thank you very much.
Good evening, parents, teachers, and fellow classmates. I am honored and flattered to have been invited to speak here this evening during this commencement service, and I am delighted to share some of my thoughts and opinions with my graduating class. As the 127th class of the Altoona Area High School, the class of 2003 has experienced many triumphs and tragedies throughout our time here as high school students. In August 2000, our graduating class entered the high school together as a whole for the very first time. No longer were we crosstown rivals, but instead one united group aimed toward working with one another for the next 3 years. As a class, we experienced the rewards and successes of high school, but also the disappointments and failures. Both academic and social success, however, have guided us here to reaching this day, and with our failures have taught us to become better individuals than we were previously. As a class, we watched each other grow, and we developed friendships among ourselves, making memories that will surely last a lifetime. As a class, we experienced tragedies that will one day be written in the history books. In our junior year, we watched as the horrific events of September 11th unfolded, while in our senior year, we watched our nation go to war in the Middle East in efforts to end global terrorism. Yet, as a class, we come together today one last time in order to complete the final phase of our high school journey. After all the studying, note-taking, standardized testing, and preparation, everyone here has reached the day most have been waiting for since the beginning of high school, June 5th, 2003, Commencement Day. In a matter of minutes, we will become high school graduates, no longer students. In a matter of months, we will be faced with some of the most difficult decisions of our lives that will most likely affect the outcome of our future. We must go out on our own and seize the day, or as said in Latin, carpe diem. An unknown author once stated, "The distance between a person's dreams and their accomplishments can only be measured by their desire." Each one of us today, wearing a maroon or white cap and gown, will be given opportunities in the near future that may help us reach our lifetime goals. The most difficult thing, however, will be overcoming the obstacles we must surpass before we can obtain these goals. It won't be easy, but no matter what, never give up on your dreams and desires. In conclusion, I am proud to say that I am a member of the Altoona Area High School class of 2003. And to my classmates, always remember, as an anonymous man once said, "Follow your dreams, for as you dream, you shall become." Thank you.
Dr. Murray, platform guests, parents, friends, and relatives of our graduates, and most of all, our graduates of the class of 2003. It gives me extreme pleasure to be here this evening to speak to you on behalf of the entire teaching staff of the Altoona Area School District. We are extremely proud of you, and we wish you well as you begin a new chapter in your life. Many of you may remember or may have heard of a very famous teacher by the name of Krista McAuliffe. Krista McAuliffe was killed in the explosion of the shuttle, the Challenger. And before she died, she often used the phrase, "I touch the future, I teach. Since her death, many teachers across America also use that expression. As a